This is TWiT.
So when we talk about Huawei, it's somewhat understandable that maybe, I mean, I can, if the U.S. government or the defense agencies have evidence that Huawei was co-opted by the Chinese government, that they might become adversaries, whether it's industrial espionage or cyber warfare, that would be reasonable to say we got to stop using Huawei stuff. And that's kind of what's happening. At this point, Huawei is persona non grata in a lot of ways. Started last week when President Trump signed an executive order banning the use of Huawei gear in actually what he banned was selling United States companies selling their gear to China, to Huawei, which pretty much puts Huawei out of business. Shortly thereafter, Google said, okay, no Android license. They did subsequently say, well, we're going to give you 90 days and we're going to keep giving you patches, but it doesn't, I don't know if that 90-day, this is part of what's so confusing about this, is this back and forth thing.
Yeah. If I'm correct about this, and please correct me if I'm wrong, it was the U.S. Department of Commerce, and then they were added to the entities list. And the entities list is basically a list of companies the American companies are forbidden to do business with unless they have a specific written exemption with that.
Okay, you know the politics.
And I mean, the thing about the operating system is probably the least troubling thing. So they can replace the operating system, and more importantly, they can get access to it because it's so much of it is open source. ARM licensing has apparently been shut down.
Yep. So ARM, the English company, has said now we're going to withdraw the license. Qualcomm, which makes ARM chips used by Huawei, says we're not going to sell you any more chips. Huawei makes its own Kirin processors, but those are ARM chips.
Yep.
Huawei can't use micro SD cards in its phone. Huawei can't buy Gorilla Glass from Corning. Huawei can't buy memory from Micron.
Right.
So the order, which Trump signed Wednesday, prohibits the purchase or use of any communications technology produced by entities controlled by a foreign adversary and likely to create undue risk of sabotage of U.S. communication systems or catastrophic effects. So that means we can't buy their stuff. The Commerce Department now has 150 days to produce rules that can identify particular countries or persons as foreign adversaries. According to Politico, that's very likely going to name China and Huawei or both, or either or both.
So, Leo, I feel like I have a lot to say about this.
Can I say one more
please,
thing?
Go ahead.
Then I'm going to give you a chance because the latest is interview with Donald Trump.
Yes.
This is awkward.
This is bad.
This was Thursday afternoon. Remember, Trump addressed the press and was asked about Huawei. This is what the president said. Huawei is something that's very dangerous. You look at what they've done from a security standpoint, from a military standpoint, it's very dangerous. So it's possible that Huawei even would be included. Wait a minute. Now, this is where, okay, got it. They're very dangerous. Then the next sentence is, so it's possible Huawei even would be included in some kind of a trade deal. If we made a deal, I could imagine Huawei being possibly included in some form, some part of a trade deal. Reporter, how would that look? Trump, it would look very good for us. Reporter, but the Huawei part, how would you design that? Oh, it's too early to say. We're just very concerned about Huawei from a security standpoint. So there's two different things he's saying here.
Right.
One is they're dangerous. The other is, well, once we have a trade deal, they're not so dangerous.
As if that will be included there.
So this is all along been my concern, and then Brianna, I'm going to ask what you think, but all along my concern is it's unclear, because we haven't been given evidence, is we know Huawei's kind of a crappy company. I mean, Father Robert said, the Huawei guy was wandering around the trade show taking pictures of the competitors' stuff. Yeah. They've been caught doing not such great stuff. Yeah. Not corporate espionage, not security stuff.
Normal everyday scumbaggery.
Many companies. One of the accusations is they flew tech reporters to Paris and London. Well, every freaking company. I get offers every week. Hey, how'd you like to go to Computex? All expenses paid. I mean, that's very common.
Yeah.
So that I don't know if that's. I mean, it's not good, but it's not national security bad.
Right.
They haven't shown us national security evidence, but maybe they can't because that would reveal sources. So I understand.
Sources and methods.
Yes.
I think it's really important to go back in time here and kind of establish a timeline here.
Okay, good.
So let's think back with 2016 and Guccifer 2.0, like basically penetrating the Hillary Clinton campaign.
And that was, we now know, Russia, GRU.
Exactly,
Okay.
exactly. So information security on these devices, this is a very legit concern. And I want to tell you, Leo, I have gotten warnings to not use Huawei devices on my campaign, to not let anyone from the Democratic National Committee, as suggested by our intelligence agencies.
And the DNC is rightly a little jumpy about this.
There, after 2016, it's a valid concern. So I want to preface my remarks by saying, InfoSec, like cybersecurity, this is 10 out of 10 important. It's the right thing for us to be thinking about as a country. But what is the evidence so far that Huawei is spying on the United States? There's nothing. There's nothing in the public domain. There's not been any evidence shown to us or any kind of information security person that we can point to and say this is an unusual threat. The best thing that they've come up to show is basically how different forks of Huawei software could potentially be, code signed in a malicious way and weaponized against us.
The UK stuff or the Vodafone
It was
stuff?
it was the UK stuff. Again, a valid concern, but if every single company that is like not doing cybersecurity correctly is going to end up on this entities list, like there's going to be a lot of people out of business in the United States.
Plus the title company.
Right, exactly. And I really want you to think for a second, what happens if China does this back to us? What happens if China says, you know what? If you're a Chinese company, you can't do anything with Microsoft software or Google software, or they decide to throw Apple out of their country again. Like, this really could be a digital Cold War.
But the fact that it could backfire against us shouldn't stop us from doing the right thing.
Of course. It's the right problem, and it's a wrong approach.
What would you suggest?
Well, Huawei, what they themselves have come forward and said is like, look, we understand you have concerns. We're willing to let you in, show you our hardware, show you our software, allow a code auditing process. It's worth pointing out, it's very hard to prove a negative. And it's very hard to prove that there's not a secret backdoor in hardware or software. But it's a step in the right direction. So I think we should, if we have concerns about spying, I think we should bring them in, should try different solutions to verify that this is not being used maliciously against us. And then if we have to take it to DEFCON 4, we can. But I don't think we're there yet.
It is. This is the other. This is so difficult and Trump just really confused it, because if he said security, 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 I'd feel more comfortable.
Yeah.
But when he says security, security, but if we make a trade deal, never mind, that really sounds like it's a good possibility that this is purely political.
Right.
On the other hand, we've talked about this before. In fact, there's really no reason to allow Huawei or any Chinese networking gear in, because most of that is software driven, and there's nothing to stop them. Maybe Huawei is completely pure as a driven snow right now. There's not a lot of evidence that they are, but let's say they are. There's nothing to stop the Chinese government in a month from saying, oh, by the way, here's some little code that you could insert into the switch.
Right.
Well, okay, you want to not disappear? Use this.
There's also been a lot of anecdotal evidence that has come out. And one of the things that has come out in some cases is you will find that stuff that has been shipped from factory X, from company X, has been rerouted, and things have been manipulated, added, or boxes have been opened somewhere in between leaving the factory and hitting
the classic
boat.
supply chain problem.
Yeah, and it's interesting, right? Because there's a lot of places for the wheels to fall off. Yeah. There's a lot of places for things to go wrong. Code is incredibly complicated. Maintaining code is incredibly complicated. Like, oh, wait, did we just forget to update the code, or did we put the wrong code on that one because some technician was up for 22 hours trying to get everything packaged for the delivery and screwed up and installed the wrong software? It's really, really messy.
Yeah. Imagine if someone got the code signing on it. They passed an update to it with the back door. The solution here isn't to blacklist one company here. It's for us to have a really serious conversation as a nation about cybersecurity, to work with other nations, to develop a framework about this stuff. And that way it's not just American safe, it's people all over the world. This isn't just an American problem. This is a worldwide problem.
Yeah.
Can we blacklist 5 more companies?
Well, by the way, the U.S. apparently, according to Bloomberg, is considering blacklisting 5 Chinese video companies, none of which I'd ever heard of.
Go to Amazon. Look for a cheap camera.
Well, that's the thing is there's a lot of those cameras on Amazon.
Yep.
Many of them may not be branded with those particular brand names.
Yep.
Here's Russell Brandom writing on The Verge. It's a convincing case when it comes to restricting Huawei's role in network infrastructure, as I just said. And it's a case a number of officials have made in that context. But it makes a lot less sense for exported hardware. Why shouldn't Corning glass or Micron flash memory be sold to Huawei for use in phones? They're not even bound for the U.S. They can't sell them. They don't sell them here. They're bound for Europe.
Right.
So the infrastructure security argument makes no sense for those phones. And if the problem really is just that China has a history of intellectual property violations, which is what President Trump says, and trade secret theft, the same logic could easily apply to other Chinese companies like Lenovo and drone maker DJI, with catastrophic consequences for those companies in the industry at large. Most of these companies make a lot of money on the West, and particularly on the U.S. We know ZTE is practically non-existent after the similar restrictions last year. I could imagine Huawei, even though they're pluckily saying, no, we can soldier on. We don't need Android. We don't need your stinking Corning glass. We don't need. We've been stockpiling parts for years. We can continue on.
Well, they have like 3 months worth of parts probably.
Yeah.
But it's also they also, I mean, part of what, to muddy the waters even further, one of the arguments about this is, the real challenge is that they're trying to clear the way for American companies or other companies to create basically all of the 5G hardware that's going to run the network, and they don't want that into. I mean, there's been they're clearing the path for other companies so that Huawei doesn't get all the business by the fact that Huawei's prices may actually be cheaper or their tools, blah blah blah. There's the other one that's like, the American government is pissed because the Chinese government will have the backdoors instead of the NSA having the backdoors at the switch level. I mean, the number of, because there's no hard information, the number of backstories and conspiracies on this just, every couple of weeks somebody's got another theory.
Can I say something about that? It's utterly legit with 5G, though. Like, there's a philosophical difference that the Chinese government wants to embed certain kinds of technologies within the 5G infrastructure code for the standard they are advocating that will allow them to basically backtrace who says what. Right, to basically track where communications come from. The American standard that we're pushing for is far more privacy-oriented. So again, my solution to this is we've seen this in the EU, this danger of balkanizing.
I'm laughing because I'm like, create the perfect device for ruling an authoritarian state, you'll be able to spy on everyone else in the world if your equipment is deployed.
So
it's completely possible. To me, in fact, seems likely there is a security threat. The Trump doesn't really understand that. He understands trade, so he conflated the two. Yeah. And that if he would try to make the resuscitation of Huawei an agenda with his trade agenda, that the intelligence agencies will say, no, Mr. President, you can't do that. So I guess we could take that part out of the equation.
Sure.
Here's what Bloomberg said, and this is actually scary. Bloomberg's headline is "The Tech Cold War has begun," and this is how they wanted it. China now has no choice but to pursue technological independence and will burn the cash to achieve it. Stratechery Ben Thompson, who lives in Taiwan and is very familiar with Chinese culture across the straits there, says this is something China's been preparing for. It is actually a very Chinese thing. This goes back to the Boxer Rebellion and China closing its doors to the West. Culturally, I think, and I'm no expert, but culturally, I think there's a long history in China of rejecting the West and say, we are the middle kingdom. We're the center of the world. We don't need you. And in fact, if they decided that, I think what would show up is maybe they don't need us, but we sure as hell need them.
Yeah.
Well, I mean,
that's a big problem. You were talking about before the show, rare earth materials.
Well, the rare earth is probably a MacGuffin. A bigger issue is like, where are all of our laptops going to be manufactured?
And our smartphones.
Yeah.
I mean,
and our game consoles,
India.
and our televisions.
India, Brazil, South Korea. I mean, I use a Samsung
part
phone
of it's,
made in
it's
South
not,
Korea.
It's not as simple as just relocating a factory. There is a massive collection of businesses, that all work together in that region that give them, at this current state, some pretty significant advantages in terms of producing electronics in a timely and efficient
Tim
fashion.
Culpin writing in Bloomberg says, even the briefest of bans will be proof to them that China can no longer rely on outsiders. We can now expect China to redouble efforts to roll out a homegrown smartphone operating system, design its own chips, develop its own semiconductor technology, including design tools and manufacturing equipment, and implement its own technology standards. Now, they've got the resources to do that. Whether they'll do it well, I don't know. But this can only accelerate, he writes, the process of creating a digital iron curtain that separates the world into two distinct, mutually exclusive technology spheres. That doesn't, on the face of it, seem like a very good thing.
It doesn't. We're seeing a balkanization of the internet with
Already.
recent EU policy.
Splinternet, they call it.
Splinternet.
Yeah.
I like that.
Yeah.
I do want to just say, and this is not my opinion. I'm just sharing my father-in-law's opinion, who is, he immigrated here from China. I would ask most Americans to take a breath and to realize many Chinese people feel an immense sense of pride with Huawei. It's the company that's kind of gone toe-to-toe with Apple. They do consider it a national treasure.
Currently
of
the
sorts.
number 2 phone manufacturer in the world.
Exactly. So, again, my instinct here is we should be working with these people and trying not to balkanize the entire technology industry.
And I think you could make a case that our national security is better served by free and open trade with an adversary than by closing the doors.
Entangled interests, absolutely.
Exactly. As long as China has an economic interest in the United States, it's highly unlikely that they're going to attack us.
Right.
And so it worries me. It feels like the wrong direction.
I agree.
And I don't want to underestimate the cybersecurity dangers Huawei presents to our network and our allies' networks. But there's got to be a better way than closing the door entirely.
Absolutely.
That doesn't seem like the best policy.
It's the right problem, but the wrong solution, basically.
Yeah. And by the way, China's hackers are pretty good too.
Yeah.
So the other risk is what we were talking about earlier, is of an all-out cyber war. I think you could make the case that the U.S. in a traditional warfare would have a strong case, but I don't know if we have the same advantage in a cyber warfare. I don't know if we do.
This was in the Wall Street Journal the other day. China is they're focusing their military currently on AI and machine learning and deep learning technology to basically have machines that spend all day, every day trying to penetrate our systems.
It's very
here.
William Gibson at this point.
It really is. It's terrifying. And, to a certain point, I think my job, if I were fortunate enough to serve in Congress, would be to fund countermeasures for that. But we need to not underestimate our enemy or potential enemy here. It doesn't matter how many tanks, guns, planes we have if we can't transport the fuel to fly them.
It's not going to do any good if the grid's shut down.
Exactly.
Ben Thompson, good article as always from Stratechery. Final paragraph. This is the true war when it comes to technology: censorship versus openness, control versus creativity, and centralization versus competition. Yeah. These are, of course, connected. China's censorship is about control facilitated by centralization. That, though, should not only give Western tech companies and investors pause about China generally, but it should also lead to serious introspection about the appropriate policies towards our own tech industry. Openness, creativity, and competition are just as related as their counterparts. Infringement on any of them should be taken as a threat to all three. So it's an interesting take on all this, which is we should as China doubles down on closing its doors, we should double down on opening our doors.
I agree.
It's a very interesting take from somebody who's very smart.